I was 14 years old, the first time I felt my world spin out of control. It was somewhere between Christmas and the New Year. I could describe the whole scene for you, but I'll boil it down to this. My mother found another syringe in the bathroom. She cried as my father confessed that he was stealing narcotics from the hospital and injecting them into the crook of his elbow. I asked him to roll up his sleeves, and I can still remember what his track marks looked like. I lay back on their bed, and my world just spun around and around. Fast forward a few years. There have been multiple rehabs and relapses. My parents divorced. My dad lost his job, his nursing license, and a stable roof over his head. He called me while I was home on winter break to tell me that he'd relapsed again, this time with crystal meth. Through his tears, he choked out that he was pointing a pistol at himself. He wanted to tell me he loved me and goodbye. My world spun around and around. Something came over him, thank God, that kept him from pulling the trigger. But that wasn't the end of the day. His house was being robbed by someone he'd been using with. He and I got into an angry confrontation over his gun. It took what felt like an hour to get him into the passenger seat. We didn't stop driving until we pulled up to the emergency room. I've been asked this morning to speak to you about stewardship, about the importance of giving and being generous and supporting Christ Church. We have two wonderful stewardship chairs this year, Ann Fletcher and Andrea Harles. I'm so grateful for their leadership. I know this seems like an unusual way to begin a sermon about stewardship, and yet it was during the darkest time in my life that I began to learn what it means to give. Addiction cost us almost everything. Nothing felt stable. The landscape changed quickly and constantly. I know my mom worried about the bills in the house. We worried for my father's well-being. Sometimes we worried for our own safety. But it's also true that even in the midst of this darkness, I was the recipient of such incredible love and care. My mother in particular, but also my grandmother, they provided for me in ways that required significant sacrifice on their part. They protected me. Neither of these women were going to allow anything bad to happen to me. I never doubted that, which was an incredible gift. And then there was our broader community, a huge part of which was our church, St. James in Shreveport. It was members of our church who checked on us, watched out for us, helped us in big ways and small ways, and it made all the difference in the world to know that they stood by, ready to help however they could. You know, we all encounter moments in life when we need help, a shoulder to lean on or to cry on, someone to hold our hand as we take that next step. Giving is important to me because I have been the recipient of the gifts of others when I needed them the most. Throughout so much of my life, to point back to Matthew's gospel, I've been surrounded by neighbors who loved me as they loved themselves. I'm the person that I am today because someone was generous to me. Many someones, actually. And I believe I have a personal responsibility to try and share that same generosity with others. I've been given to generously, which makes me want to give generously. My father eventually found sobriety. It was hard work that unfolded one day at a time over 9 years. He remarried, held on to a steady job. He took his medication. Tate and I were living in New Orleans when my dad and I spoke on the phone and celebrated his 9th sobriety birthday. I was so proud of him. A couple of days later, I noticed that I'd missed several calls from a Shreveport area code. My father and stepmother lived out in the country. They were going for a walk around their land. My dad tripped and clipped the trigger of the gun he was carrying, shooting himself through the chest. He died laying in the grass in front of their house, waiting for a helicopter to bring him to the hospital. 5 minutes on a midwinter Sunday evening changed all of our lives forever. 12 step circles encourage us to live one day at a time. I hold tight to that wisdom. And yet, when I look back at this time in my life, I realize how much I was living in the future. That future disappeared in an instant. One lesson that my dad's death continues to teach me is that there is nothing guaranteed about tomorrow. All we have is this present moment. I began wrestling with questions that demanded honest answers. If I were not here tomorrow, have I lived the type of life that would be missed? Has my life made any real difference to the communities that I care about? I'm alive, but am I really living? I worked to become more present and stop living so far off in the future. Tate and I also made some adjustments in our lives, like becoming more purposeful with our financial contributions. We wanted to start giving back to our church, for instance, in a way that reflected all that our church had given to us. On that note, I want to share with you that this year, the Kellogg's will be pledging $450 a month to Christ Church. I think it's important for you to know that we're in. I also want to say this. I know it's an unusual time. We're in the middle of a pandemic, a divisive national election. Nothing feels simple about this moment. But in my heart of hearts, I believe Christ Church is needed right now. Since 1794, our church has helped generations of people on Capitol Hill navigate the ups and downs of life, and we're being called to offer that same spiritual rootedness in our time. You know, the first time that I walked into this sanctuary, I felt the prayers and love that had been shared here for over 200 years. We are the current stewards of this beloved place. Here's how you can help. If you don't currently pledge, please consider making a regular gift of any amount, $50, $100, whatever makes sense for you or your family. It will make an impact for us. If you do pledge, thank you, truly. I hope you'll join me in asking God how we can lean further in and contribute to this chapter in the Christ Church story. There's nothing guaranteed about tomorrow. God calls us to live today and give today. This last story I want to share with you is a very quick one about gratitude. When Alec was trying to enter this world, Tate went through a long and complicated labor. The doctors were worried she was bleeding too much. My whole world was in the hands of a medical team that I barely knew. I will never forget the moment that I was handed a 10.5-pound baby, followed by news that Tate was going to be okay. I was standing in what the Irish referred to as a thin place, where the distance between heaven and earth collapses. The moment was nothing short of being in God's presence. I had never in my entire life felt such an intense flood of gratitude. We are who we are because we take care of each other. Christ Church is particularly good at that, and we're called to care for each other now in this moment, not to live far off in the future. We have all been given gifts that we don't deserve, and when we receive them, it makes us want to live in that space of gratitude as the very best versions of ourselves. How can we learn to give in a way that reflects all that we've been given? It's a big question. As Dietrich Bonhoeffer reminds us, it is only with gratitude that life becomes rich. In the name of God.